So in this second learning outcome, what we had to do primarily was to look at understanding, why is performance measurement of performance in the organization is important. And when I look at the measurement of performance, we discussed the concept of why this concept of performance management is important. Because when you have employees within the organization, your main role and aim is to basically divide or delegate work, and that work then can be accomplished quickly in a better fashion, and it can be done by a number of employees, wherein it frees up your manager's time or a leader's time. But these people, when you hire employees, they can come in and take up work which allows the company to expand. So when this could be one approach. The second would be, if you are a running business and an organization which is quite large, which has a lot of employees, then in that case, what will happen is you will have this process, because what you want to do is measure the performance. That if you have been given 1, 2, 3, 4 tasks in your job description, are you able to do that on a day-to-day basis? Are you able to come, and perform on those bases? And basis the performance, measurement of that performance, because you have created benchmarks, and if they are able to meet the benchmarks, they're in line for a promotion, wage increase. It could lead to incentives, bonuses. But if they are not, then you identify some of these steps to look at, put them into training and development. But at the end of it, you measure performances because you want the output from the employee for which the employee is getting a wage or a salary. So the process of performance, measuring of performance against the job description given is quite important in the organization, because it helps achieve objectives, it helps achieve goals, and it helps us achieve, the long-term plan of the vision of the organization. And the concept through which HR does this process of managing performance by looking at benchmarking, by looking at, reviewing, by looking at doing performance appraisals, by also looking at, apart from this, we covered something which you mentioned in your assignment, the 360-degree feedback, is to look at getting feedback on how the employee is actually performing within the organization. So here we looked at the concept of, performance management, and, according to Berkeley's human resources, it basically meant that, this is a continuous process through which an employee engages with the organization and the supervisor in order to achieve the objectives or goals which have been given. And this process involves a couple of things. So, before you accept any sort of goals, what you do is you also do a bit of discussion with your manager, isn't it? So your manager say, okay, this year your target is, say, to achieve, say 20,000 in sales. But if you have achieved only 5,000 last year, and he's asking you to achieve 20,000, that means it's a 300% jump in your target that he's asking you to achieve. Now, would you agree to that goal? Is that goal realistic? Is that goal measurable? Is that goal achievable? Is that goal something which will allow you to, perform and, be satisfied in your job? So all those are elements of, to be considered while you accept a target. Before you even accept that target, you discuss that, and that happens in scoping. You agree to the goals, or you basically look at, recalibrating goals. No, 20,000 is not possible. I did 5,000 last year. I could probably look at trying to achieve 100% growth, maybe go to 10,000 this year, and that would be an achievable goal. So you discuss that. Negotiation tends to happen between you and your supervisor, and that also, then finalizes what kind of target you'll be able to achieve. Then at some stage, these targets are reviewed, on a monthly basis, monitored or reviewed, then on a quarterly basis. And these targets, then you set priorities against that. And then towards the end, what happens is you look at balancing time. How do you look at improvement by organization helping you to do training? And then in some cases, towards the end, you start measuring these targets by using a technique called balanced scorecard. Management by objective, balanced scorecard, 360-degree feedback, performance appraisals are all techniques to measure performance of an individual within the organization. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So, and then what I've done in those slides is primarily looked at giving you some more details in terms of what is the nature of performance management? Why do we need to look at SMART objectives? Which are objectives which employees can achieve? There should be enough motivation to achieve them, and that should not create things like job dissatisfaction, but create job satisfaction. People or staff working within the company should be motivated to come to their job rather than think that, okay, this is something which I don't want to do. Oh my God, and what I want to do is start finding a new job. So that starts affecting the performance of not just the employee, but also the overall department or organization. So a couple of slides on that. Then what we looked at is who are the key people who are, when we look at the methods. Now, what are the various methods through which performance management can be done within an organization? So we looked at, performance appraisal, which is the most, commonly used tool to measure the performance of an employee. And here we covered, the critiques means the three different people who are definitely involved in doing your performance appraisal. So one is the design of the appraisal itself, in which the HR manager gets involved because they define the frequency of the appraisal, what activities the appraisal would cover, how will it look at, listening to the employee's perspective, but also the perspective of, the manager or the supervisor, and how the employee has performed in regards to, the organizational goals which have been set. So the second part was looking at execution. That means the appraisal is directly linked to the person working in that role, how he or she actually works on a day-to-day basis, understands the job responsibilities, able to perform on that, meet the set goals and targets. And then the manager's role, which is primarily looking at, appraisals itself towards the end of the year, when they sit down and look at the appraisal, what is the role the manager plays, and he has to be fair enough in terms of doing the appraisals. He can't be seen to be favorable to one employee as against the other who has performed or not performed. And that is where the role of the manager actually comes in. And then I did basically dwell into a bit more detail on the performance management cycle, because it involves a lot of things. And that is where the variety of different types of appraisal starts to come in. So when you look at just doing the appraisal for the employee, you basically talk about, looking at the three aspects of how the appraisal design is done, what has the employee actually performed on, and when the manager does the appraisal, what are the key factors he or she has to look into to be fair, to be seen to be fair, and obviously do a fair appraisal at the end of the year. But then when we look at the whole cycle, we look at planning, monitoring, developing, rating, and rewarding. And when we look at rating, you normally look at 360-degree appraisals, which starts to come in because if you're in a client-facing role, you deal with customers, you deal with suppliers or partners, then the organization is more interested in also finding out, is the person, putting across or portraying a right image of the organization to its partners, to its customers? Are the customers happy? And that's where they want to take feedback from other key stakeholders who are essentially involved in, indirectly in a way in the performance appraisal of an employee. So some of these things were mentioned and steps were defined. And then what we looked at towards the end was giving you a bit more detail in terms of assuming, if the employee falls short of performance, what are the steps which the company can take if they feel that the organization, the employee is performing exceedingly well, how the career development of that can be done using the performance appraisal. So if you've been performing well, you've had an excellent appraisal for the last 2, 3, 4 years, then you are in line or due for a promotion or a significant rise in wages, or maybe a change of role or responsibility. And those are things which, when we look at the whole cycle of performance development, it consists of, looking at this. So the other thing would be when we look at, what are the benefits to M1, the merit task. So we looked at, what are the benefits to employees of performance appraisal. And then when I talk about the designing of the appraisal process, I've gone into some of the details of how, the appraisal process can be defined and what are the key things which actually need to be looked at, from a perspective of, looking at benefits to making the process fair and something which can happen on an automated basis when we look at, the whole process of, doing performance appraisal for an employee. So this has been defined, and obviously some bits of this has been taken. What I did was primarily put across 2 handouts, and these 2 handouts were primarily taken from, one was from ACAS, which is primarily, the advisory service, from which it is given a bit of a template to see how you can look at, doing a performance appraisal, or, how do you, it's a step-by-step guide essentially, which tells you how an appraisal can be done and what are the steps you need to follow. So this is maybe a good reading exercise for you to familiarize yourself with what actually happens in the process. And this will look at also giving you examples that you can cover in task 2.2, because what it asks you to do is define the necessary standards. So for example, certain standards like, how do you set objectives, how you measure objectives, those are things, which are defined in this document. The second handout which I'd given was more of a booklet, and this is something which is downloaded from the ACAS website, because this is an advisory service which allows you to, get advice on anything related to employment and employment law. And if you have disputes with your employer, then you can actually approach them to settle the disputes through, a third-party organization, which is this particular service. So here, this particular guide talks about various rules. When you look at the 2M1 and 2D1, this guide would help you understand in practicality how this whole process actually works. And there's a very good diagram here where it's, it's a flowchart which basically says how to manage performance. And this summarizes, with a bit of additional reading, the learning outcome too. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what we're going to do today is basically, so after this, in a way, I've kind of done a bit of a recap for you for what was sent across in learning outcome 2. But now in the third one, what we're going to be looking at doing is how to develop people. So we started off with understanding how recruitment happens. Once you're in the organization and you're taken up the role, you're working on a day-to-day basis in terms of your day-to-day operations. What the organization then does is when you become a permanent employee, you go through the probation period, you become a permanent employee. At some stage, when you've completed the first full year, the organization starts to look at doing an appraisal. Now, once the appraisal has been done, what the appraisee and the appraiser, that means the appraisee would be the person who's undergoing appraisal, like the staff, and the appraisee would be the manager. Now, if they come across and find certain areas which need, what you call improvement, or areas wherein you need training and development. So in those areas, what then they tend to do is basically put you into training and development. And when we look at that whole process of training and development, in a way, is what we are going to go into what is called the learning outcome 3. So here, what we want to know is how organizations actually look at developing individuals or people within the company. So the first learning outcome we will look at would be to try and understand the differences between coaching, mentoring, and training, and that is something which is quite important. So let's look at very briefly, getting into one or two, slides. So what I've done in the slides here is basically gone on to straight away the concepts of, what is training, counseling, with the key terms that we want to find out. But if I just look at very briefly one other thing which I want to open and talk about, the basic concepts. Just opening another presentation. So that's a bit of a handout which I have, and just sharing the screen again. So this particular handout that I have actually talks about, what is the difference between coaching, mentoring, and counseling. Now this is important because what we want to be able to do is basically understand the concept of coaching first. Why do you look at coaching? Now there is, if I just briefly look at, a couple of things first in terms of definition. So when you look at the process of, coaching, how do you, can you think of ways in which, in terms of how do you define coaching? What is a coach? Can you think of things when it talks about what is a coach?
No.
Okay. If I give you a simple example of, when we look at football teams, do you follow football by any chance? Any sports that you follow, you would normally see there's a coach for a particular team. Now, when you have a number of individuals working within a particular team or setup, and they are going to go after trying to achieve a particular goal, what tends to happen is you have somebody who comes into a position which is a coaching position, and here that person would, kind of be responsible for, supporting the learners, or for example, in our case, we are acting as a bit of coach or teacher, what you call it, is because what we are helping you to do is basically supporting you to study this particular qualification. But if I look at really the concept of coaching is basically a person looking at a form of development in which the person will actually help the other side or the people working, that he's overseeing or supervising with specific personal and professional goals. So here the idea would be that the coach would come in because he has got prior experience, and with the prior experience, that person has been in that situation before, and what that person will be able to do is come in and primarily look at giving direct advice or direct support to people, in this case, to be able to achieve a specific personal or professional objective. So when we look at a football coach, his main aim is, at some point in time, most of the football managers or coaches that you look at, they have played professional football at various levels, league, country level, club level, and things like that. And what they have acquired over the years after playing and having a successful career is that they have mastered the techniques of how to play under stress, how to play against certain teams, and how to look at organizing a set of players to be able to win matches. So the coach actually comes in with a lot of experience, is able to support and kind of get the individuals behind him to follow his advice, and towards the end, by providing the training and the guidance and the let's put it this way, the support that he gives, he's able to create a winning team. And that person then is normally called a coach, or a person who is able to provide these set of services would be providing something called coaching. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Now, coaching can also be defined, by in different ways. So if you look at the concept of coaching by Chartered Institute of Personal Development, which is CIPD, they basically say that a person can only be in a coaching position if he or she exhibits certain qualities or shows certain qualities. So one coach could be somebody who consists of doing one-on-one discussions. That means you're working with me, I'm working with you, and it is a one-on-one discussion, and I'm guiding you on a one-on-one basis to be able to accomplish a personal task or a professional task. The second is he is able to provide feedback on strengths and weaknesses of the individual because of his experience, because of his knowledge, because of the skills that he has. That person is able to provide feedback on certain aspects of what things you're doing right, what things you're not doing right, and those can be identified as what is called strengths and weaknesses. The other things that we look at is that this person, when you ask somebody to come in and there is a problem, and you ask somebody to come in and solve that problem, you ask most probably in situations like this a specialist to come, who is, when I say a specialist, because he or she can come in, look at that issue, identify the problem, and then give you a solution to solve it. So when we look at changes which happen in terms of football managers, and one club sacks the manager, they get another manager in because they want to save the team from going into relegation or going out of competition. They try and bring more aggressive people who have had those situations before, wherein they've successfully saved or transformed teams from going into relegation by letting them stay into Premier League. So the club board actually tries to bring in an individual. That individual is able to come in, understand the specific issue, and then offer a solution which is for a specific objective, that is to save the club from relegation, and that would be constituting something called coaching, because the person is able to come, diagnose the problem, see the issue, and then create a solution which allows them to use his experience and skills to come out of that situation. So there are various types of I would say characteristics which a coach shows, and that is why it is called coaching. Now, if I look at coaching and if I look at mentoring, what is the difference between the two? So if I look at the concept of mentoring, coaching can be one-to-many. That means as a person, you can coach many people. You can, coach a team. You can basically look at, when I say, come in and basically, when I say one-to-many, but that means you can come in and primarily look at doing a number of activities which could benefit not just one, but a number of people within that organization. But when I look at mentor or mentoring and mentorship as a concept, what tends to happen in this is that mentoring is normally on a one-to-one basis, right? You would normally have somebody who is personally helping you to achieve an objective. So mentoring, when we look at, is specifically to a place wherein a person which is experienced comes in and is more knowledgeable than the other person, and is able to guide and obviously provide specific advice for him to tide through a problem, or go over a particular hurdle. So when I look at mentoring, an example of this would be, sometimes what happens is when you join a new job or when you join a new organization, after having your induction and working within the company for a few days, what tends to happen is, for you to be able to pick up the job or pick up your job responsibilities quickly, the supervisor or your manager or HR manager would actually put you or ask you to shadow somebody or follow somebody very closely. So in this case, what tends to happen is they're trying to basically look at getting you aligned to work with someone who is going to be working with you closely. And if you mirror or follow that person, you are going to be able to pick up a lot of skills which are required to do your job quite effectively. So here, the process of mentoring seems to be, a process wherein the company would want you to work on and, take on, for example, certain roles and responsibilities, but because you do not have experience in that, they want you to kind of mirror or shadow someone to be able to pick that up. And here, the concept is normally one-to-one. So in this case, the person who's going to be, you are his mentee. In that case, what will tend to happen is that you will essentially follow and look at following that particular person to be able to pick up a lot of traits and qualities. So here, when we look at the concept of mentoring, it is normally one-to-one, and when we look at the concept of coaching, it could be one-to-many. And what I've done here is, after you understand the broad concept, I've tried to put together the small table which basically differentiates the two concepts in terms of why they are different. So mentoring could be an ongoing relationship, and this is for a long period of time. Coaching could be for a set duration, like you are trying to reduce weight, you hire a personal trainer, and that personal trainer will coach you to reduce your weight, or something like that, in terms of a personal goal from one a point to a different point. So coaching tends to be short term, because an example that I gave here would be, when we look at coaching, it is short term because you might hire a personal trainer, and that personal trainer would help you to achieve a certain objective, like you're looking at toning your body, reducing weight, and that acts as a personal coach because he's only coaching you to reduce your weight from A point to B point. But when you look at mentoring, it tends to be a long-term process wherein the person is required to, follow, shadow, mirror a particular employee within the organization, because here the idea is to look at transferring of skills and experience that you are able to pick up by closely working with that person, and that person would be called your mentor, and you will be the mentee because you're kind of following that person, and the process is called mentoring. So I've put together a small table here which kind of defines the reasons or differentiation between coaching and mentoring, and this is something that you could look at in order to cover the first task, which is 3.1. Now, in the second part, what we also want to do is relate counseling. What is counseling? Now, counseling is normally provided when you are in trouble. Counseling is provided when you're seeking a specific solution which is bothering you. Counseling could be defined as something which is a very high level of skill required, or sometimes intervention, as we call it, required to help you tide over certain sort of problems. Now, we look at the concept of counseling normally for psychological problems. So sometimes if you're troubled, if you've had a trauma, for example, if you've lost somebody, you sometimes see that, the concept of counseling happens for, if I look at giving you a current example of what happened in New Zealand, the shootings in the mosque. Now, there are innocent people which have got killed. Because of that activity, a lot of kids which have gone through the trauma are going to be receiving counseling so that it will help them tide over that particular trauma that they have received during, during that day, during that time when these shootings happen. If somebody has been through an accident, or if somebody has had a personal situation in which they've lost somebody very close to them, or they've had an issue which has affected them, mentally or physically, then in those cases what you look at is the concept of counseling. Another example that I would give you in the office would be that if you see a person who's not able to manage time, when you look at time management within the office, so he comes late, or there is a tendency of that person coming in late to the office. So what the first step as a manager would do is basically, first red flag would be that, okay, you're coming late, and he flags it off with the employee. You need to, come on time, and that is spoiling the schedule or the discipline within the organization. Now, if that does not improve over a period of time, the second red flag is raised, and what that red flag does is refers it to the HR manager, and the HR manager would basically then sit with the employee to understand why is there an issue of you coming late. Now, those areas are areas wherein the HR manager would act as a counselor to say that, let me understand if there is any personal problem, or is there any professional problem which is bothering you, because of which you're not able to manage time or, come on time. And that could be affecting your performance. So the idea there is the organization is trying to understand what could be the underlying issue which is preventing the employee to actually come on time to the office. Now, that process through which the HR subtly discusses with the employee in terms of looking at discipline within the organization, and that is to look at time and time management, what that would be seen as a process of something called counseling, not a process of coaching, because he's not learning something, not a process of mentoring, because he's not looking at picking up skills, experience, or anything like that, but it is to do with following a particular decorum within the organization, rules and regulation, adhering to the code. And that is where the HR manager acts as a bit of a counselor to say and understand if there is any problem which he or she can actually help him overcome, and that would tide that employee, into coming on time. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So another table just to differentiate these two terms. Why is coaching different from counseling, and when is counseling actually used? Now we get into some of the other things when we look at learning cycle. So in the learning cycle we talk about, so that covers your task 3.1, and this is a particular handout which I'm going to send you, which basically covers to read about coaching, mentoring, and counseling, gets into different types and details of why this concept is used and in what situation or places this concept is particularly used. Now let's go to understanding learning. Now that within the organizations there are different ways of learning. What could be the ways in which the organization helps you learn? Can you think of some ways through which while you work within a job or when you work within a business or a company, how do you pick up, how do you do learning in that on a day-to-day basis?
Looking at the other people.
Right, okay. Yeah.
Mm.
What else can you think of?
I don't know, like searching some information about the business or whatever it is, the company.
Right. Okay. That's also okay. So let's look at sometimes here what is learning, and let me define learning first. Now, if you think of the process of learning, when do you learn? What is the process of learning? When you're trying to learn, again, I don't want to use the word learn. When you're trying to pick up, say, for example, a skill or a trait that could be used on a day-to-day basis. For example, you've joined a new company and they have given you a laptop. Now, instead of using a Windows laptop, they've given you a Mac, and because the company uses a Mac, so they've given you a MacBook. Now, here, in order for you to, the usage of PC, how to work on a laptop, it is pretty much the same. But because you're conveniently, you are basically conversant and convenient in terms of convenience in terms of using Windows, but suddenly when you get a Mac OS or a Mac operating system, you might take a bit of time to unlearn a few things in terms of how things work on a Macintosh or on a MacBook, isn't it? So here, that process through which you will do what you mentioned, like you'll do a bit of a search on Google and you'll try things out, you'll observe the other employees, is basically helping you quickly pick up few things in terms of how this would be used, because this IT instrument or IT laptop or this MacBook has been provided to you for you to be able to work effectively within the organization. So this concept of what you do in terms of acquiring new skills, knowledge, learning or unlearning some of your existing skills and knowledge or preferences is basically classed as the process of something called learning. A simple example that I would give you is when you learn to cycle or bike, you do it once, and once you have learned, you never forget it throughout your life, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you learn to swim, you learn to swim once, and then if you know how to swim, you're able to swim throughout your life. You don't forget this. So what sometimes happens is when you pick up some of these things, there is a concept called tacit knowledge, and there is a concept called explicit knowledge. Now, tacit knowledge is a kind of knowledge which once you acquire, it is difficult to transfer to another person. That means, for example, if you learn swimming, you can basically help other people to learn swimming as well. But this is opposite of tacit, because here explicit knowledge is if you give some instructions to the people, or help till basically the person to be able to understand, okay, if you flap your hands and you move your feet, you're able to swim, and you basically give them some guidance, and if they follow that guidance, you give them some support in the pool, they are able to pick up swimming as well. They are able to learn. So explicit knowledge is knowledge which can be transferred to other individuals, and that does not require a lot of effort, because here the person can follow a set of instructions, can mirror you, and then that means the knowledge can be transferred, the skill can be transferred. But in the case of tacit knowledge, you have to acquire that over a point in time by your own experience. So this is something which is a knowledge that you acquire by the means of maybe doing an explicit piece of work, or doing something which then gives you that experience to say that, okay, this is something which I've experienced and you need to experience it, but you cannot transfer that experience. So, for example, when you look at, if you're able to learn a language, the ability to be able to learn a language, bike, or maybe swim is basically tacit knowledge, because you've worked hard, and once you pick up this skill is something which you can only acquire by doing practically experience yourself. Is that okay?
Yeah.
When we look at the process of learning is something which is related to, you learning new skills straight, unlearning a few skills straight to be able to adapt to the environment which allows you to function well, or, work well within a business or a company. Now, having given you a bit of a background in terms of what is the definition of learning, what is learning, it could be tacit and explicit. We want to look at how does learning actually happen. So when I look at the concept of how does learning actually happen, you would look at a couple of ways. First ways would be that there is some of these things you can learn on your own. That means you do not need any supervision, but like reading a book, for example, you read the book and you gain the knowledge from it, and that would be an approach which you look at, which would be something classified as something called self-managed learning. Some of the things that you do by setting targets for your personal self, that I want to say, for example, run the 10K marathon, the London marathon. But what you do is you prepare yourself for a number of months and years to be able to run that marathon. Now that is something that you're doing yourself. So what is happening is you're making yourself aware of the requirements of the London marathon, how to register, what will be the route of the marathon, and you're basically acquiring knowledge by doing your own research, and this you are not requiring any guidance. This process is called self-managed learning. Is that okay? Now, self-managed learning or learning within the organization can also happen when you look at attending seminars or conferences. When you are asked to attend a particular course, these are various ways through which learning can actually happen. So sometimes you mentioned that you look at other people, you look at observing news, or reading an article, looking at, say, for example, some sort of reading a blog. Now these are ways through which learning can actually happen. So you attend a training seminar, you go to a conference, you look at reading articles on the internet, you look at doing your own research on the internet to find something. For example, you're trying to find a house, you're trying to find an address. what you're doing is you go onto Google Maps, and you type the address, and you're trying to find the directions to go to that particular, address. And what you're doing is you're doing your own research through the internet to try and familiarize yourself with the terrain of how you would go from place A to place B.
Yeah.
So there are different ways of learning, and what you could look at is within the organization. When we talk about ways of learning, there are different ways of learning within the organization, and normally a company would look at putting you into some sort of training. They would look at asking you to attend a course. They would ask you to primarily go into, say, for example, attending a seminar. They might ask you to log into. A lot of companies now have their own training portals, right? When you join as an employee, they expect you to do trainings throughout the year, and what they give you is a login and a password to their own training portal. That means you can access things like an employee handbook, some policies and procedures. There are some other trainings which are given on health and safety, and these trainings they expect you to go through, or this particular text they expect you to go through and acquire that knowledge. And this particular bit happens through the process of something called self-managed learning. Is that okay?
Yep.
Now, apart from this, in terms of when we look at it talks about the third task talks about describe a range of psychometric tests and their usages. Now, there are different types of tests which sometimes when you're giving a job interview, and when you're giving a job interview, what happens is you will see that there are certain types of tests which the HR department asks you to take, and these kind of tests are done to understand the psychology, your personality, your capability in terms of knowledge, and also your academic vigor. And these kind of tests which are done are classified as something called psychometric tests. Sometimes you will see that there are tests, the 2 or 3 different types that we want to look at is there is something which is called the Myers and Briggs test. Now these were a series of studies undertaken by Isabel Briggs Myers, and she came up with the concept that individuals have different types of personality, and these tests are classified as something called personality tests. Now these tests are available on the internet. What I'm going to do is primarily send you a link for you to take some of these tests, so that you try and find out what is your leadership style, what is your personality, and it'll put forward a number of questions, multiple choice to you, and then you answer these questions honestly, and what it'll at the end of it tell you is that what kind of personality you have, what kind of traits you have, what are the skills which you have, or should have actually if you want to work within that role. Now these kind of tests are called what is called the psychometric tests. Is that okay? So here the idea is you have to be able to describe some of these psychometric tests. And these tests, if I put it this way, by just quickly highlighting why they are done within the organization. So if I look at them, this is basically done to test your skills, your personality, your knowledge, your prior experience. Now, sometimes you will see that the organization look at doing these tests is because they will want to find out, when you join the company, are you going to be able to work within a team? Are you going to be, not able to work within a team? Or are you going to come in and obviously, disrupt the apple cart? Sometimes you hear this sentence that, what they want is they're looking to hire somebody who can actually come in, become a part of the team and execute the job responsibilities which have been given. Now, in terms of that, what they do is they look at doing a psychometric test. Are you, are you somebody who's able to take commands? Are you able to take instructions from your superiors? Are you able to, work, on a mutually beneficial fashion with other employees within the organization? And these are things which are covered in what is called the psychometric test. So sometimes, depending on the level at which you're joining within the organization or the kind of responsibility that you have, some of these tests will look at just testing your skills. An example that I would give you here is that if Facebook is to hire programmers, the main thing that they would want to see when they get CVs, shortlist the CVs and ask the interview people to come in to interview, what they want to do at some stages, put them to the test to test out their skills. Can they design? Can they make a code? Can they write a particular code in a language? I can say a lot of things on my CV that I know Python, Java, COCOA and all that in terms of languages which are required to produce applications. But the HR manager, the engineering manager, at some stage when they've gone through the basic interviews of understanding the person is fine, they've looked at your CV, they've done everything. But at some stage, they will put him through or her through a skill test. And that skill test would say that, can you design a piece of code? And they will give him or her or the person some time. And in the organization, they'll ask him to do a test, which is to judge the skills, because what they want to see is what you've written in your CV is actually standing out in terms of testing the time, in terms of ensuring that what you've said is actually true. Is that okay?
Yep.
Personality test would be looking at when you are joining, say, for example, at the middle management or senior management level. So here, what they want to be able to look at is they want to look at different traits of your personality. And when we look at different traits, this was the test which was created by Myers and Briggs. And as you can see, what they are looking at is certain types of people, because when she did her studies, she came up with certain types of traits. And these certain types of traits primarily, were traits like, defined as ISTJ, and she came up with this terminology. And this terminology allowed, people to be grouped into certain personality types. And she came out and suggested 16 different personality types. And they are represented here. So sometimes you look at people who are analysts, diplomats, sentinels, explorers, and within that you have different types of personality of people. So here, when people are being recruited for senior positions, what they want to see is a particular type of person. And in that, they end up doing something called personality test. So you see the terminology here. Now, knowledge and skills actually go hand in hand. So sometimes if you say that I have 10 years of experience, that means they also expect that you have gained a number of skills and knowledge over the years by working within different organizations. So they are also hiring you on the basis of your knowledge. But when they want to test your knowledge, the testing of knowledge can be done through, again, certain types of tests. So in the case of an example that I gave you of Facebook, if they're looking at hiring a programmer, they're testing the skill, but they're also testing the knowledge to see if the person is able to, recall what the programming is for that code and, things like that. And then sometimes you look at doing tests which are primarily just to understand the experience. So this could be done through the interview route. This could be done through group discussions route, and this could also be done through focus group discussions, wherein you take the person through various interview stages, and in that you basically tend to understand the different types of things which the person is actually describing. So in this particular part, what I would suggest is you have to look at studying at least the personality test, and these personality tests primarily are going to be looking at the Myers-Briggs test, with regards to the learning outcome, assessment criteria 3.3, which is in learning outcome 3. Is that okay?
Right.
And then in the merit task, what it is asking you to do is basically extend, by giving examples to describe different type of opportunities which can be provided in the organization. So here, when I talk about different type of opportunities, what we are primarily understanding is that how does a person, get an opportunity to become a mentor, get an opportunity to look at becoming a coach, or in what situations you are looking at, giving an example that how would you, look at a situation wherein the person is asked to coach or be a mentor or, do a bit of counseling. And that is covered in, task 3M1, which is merit. 3M2 talks about, appropriate supports to offer to individuals during diverse scenarios. That means here you have to basically look at how you would essentially offer support to individuals which are primarily, facing challenges or issues. So time management, which is an example which I've given you here, would be a situation in which the person is not able to make it on time or is not able to deliver and meet objectives. So here what you have to do is offer specific solutions which could be related to, counseling, mentoring, or coaching. Is that okay?
Yeah.
And this particular handout, which I have, which I'm going to send you on the details of, coaching, mentoring, and individuals within an organization. This would primarily cover, the 3D1 as well, because in this case, what you're looking at doing is an evaluation. That means you're breaking each of the components down of coaching into different types of coaching. What are the benefits? Training into different types of training, like you have executive training, you have seminars, you have training, seminars, conferences, different types, and what are the benefits? And then looking at the concept of coaching and mentoring, and then defining them in a bit more detail to show evaluation. Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions on today's discussions?
No, I ain't got no questions.
Okay. Now, in terms of the slides, when you look at, you'll be able to get, the theoretical aspects of what are psychometric tests, things like, sometimes when I say different types of tests, we looked at Myers and Briggs, which is an example of a test. But when you look at psychometric tests, when I explain the 4 different types, you look at skill test, knowledge, personality, and experience, they are defined here. So when you look at the skills test, can also be called the aptitude test, because you're testing the aptitude of a person. Some of these tests could be qualitative and quantitative. That means you're testing the knowledge, but quantitative could be you're asking them to do and show it to you. And then when we look at, the different types, my suggestion would be to try and pick out at least one, which is like the Myers and Briggs test. I'm going to send you a link for this particular website, wherein the idea would be to take a test and find out what is your personality type. So it will ask you to do a couple of questions, and when you finish answering these questions, it will give you a different personality type or what kind of personality you have. Is that okay?
Okay. Yep.
Good stuff. Good stuff. And I'll definitely get this back to you in terms of the feedback, for Unit 2, so we can sign that off. And I know Unit 1 has been signed off, and then Unit 2, which is signed off today.
All right. Perfect.
Okay. No worries. I'll catch up with you in the next session. What day have we sent out the invite for the next session?
I think we got Wednesday as well.
Monday as well. Okay. Wednesday. Okay.
Yeah.
So today is Wednesday, I know, but we haven't put out any invite for you for next Wednesday. So next Wednesday, should I ask Sami to send the invite?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, next Wednesday. Yeah.
Same time. Okay, that's fine. No problem.
Thanks.
We'll do that. Okay, Alexandra, take care, and I'll speak to you soon. If you need any help, or if you have any queries or questions, just feel free to email me. I'll come back to you pretty much straight up.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Take care. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.